Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Burns, and I'm the president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I am very pleased to welcome all of you here today for an event about an important country and an important part of the world. For those of us who follow the region, the proposition that Tunisia matters is not terribly controversial, but for many it can prove a little counterintuitive. Tunisia, after all, is a small country of 11 million people with an economic output 1/4 of that of the state of Maryland. It is surrounded by a major energy player to its west and a country convulsed by civil conflict to its east. With fires burning across the region, Tunisia can sometimes get lost in the smoke. Tunisia may be small, but it is disproportionately significant for regional order, for the fate of reform and democracy across the Arab world, and for U.S. national interests. Tunisia's failure would not only dispirit all those who yearn and sacrifice for more pluralism in the Arab world, it would send thousands more Tunisians into the arms of extremist groups and human traffickers. That would deal a body blow to the fight against ISIS, and it would deal a body blow to Europe's efforts to deal with the refugee crisis and its profound political and geopolitical consequences. Besides admiring Tunisia's remarkable but fragile transition, my Carnegie colleagues decided to try to offer concrete ideas to ensure its success. Thanks to the encouragement, support, and partnership of the Open Society Foundations, we were able to assemble a distinguished team of scholars to analyze why Tunisia's transition has run into difficulties and how Tunisians and their international partners might overcome them. Our team included regional experts and former high-ranking diplomats from the Middle East, Europe, and the United States. Together, they spent considerable time in Tunisia, leading a series of structured consultations with Tunisia's leadership, elected representatives, political parties, the business sector, trade unions, and civil society organizations. They also spent considerable time in European capitals and here in Washington to understand better the perspectives of Tunisia's international public and private partners and what they can do to support Tunisian-led reforms. Their charge was not to reinvent the wheel, but to see if they could help point the policy conversation in a more productive direction. My colleagues approached this exercise with humility and a clear recognition that only Tunisians should determine their country's course. This is why I'm so pleased that we'll have an opportunity today to hear not only from my former colleague, Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken, but also from Tunisia's Minister of Development and International Cooperation, Yassine Brahim, as well as a number of Tunisian voices from the private sector. To present Carnegie's new report, introduce our first distinguished keynote, and launch today's conversation, it is my pleasure to invite our Vice President for Studies and my friend, Marwan Muasher, to the podium. Marwan has done as much as anyone I know, not only to make the case for greater pluralism in the Arab world, but also to help make it a reality. Marwan understands what is at stake in Tunisia, and together with our colleagues Mark Perini and Alex Girassi, he's written a smart, sensible, and pragmatic report full of ideas that deserve attention and action. So thanks again to all of you for joining us this morning, and thanks to Marwan for kicking things off. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Bill, and good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to say a few words about the new report we are releasing today and to introduce Minister Yassine Brahim. Let me first thank the Open Society Foundations for its support. Our Middle East program takes great pride in looking at long-term trends in the Middle East and to helping policymakers think beyond the horizon. There are, however, moments when it is imperative to focus on the current situation and the near future. I think that when it comes to Tunisia and how best to support this new democracy, today is precisely that kind of moment. So I'm deeply grateful for OSF's focus on Tunisia and its partnership with Carnegie. I also want to acknowledge my two co-authors, Ambassador Mark Perini and Alex Girassi, for their many hours of work on this project. My hope is that together we will succeed not only in raising awareness about Tunisia, but also help generate concrete ideas about how Tunisians and their partners can ensure the country's success. I'm convinced Tunisia can succeed. 5 years ago, Tunisians courageously pushed a dictator from power. That, remarkably, was the easy part. Realizing the aspirations that inspired their uprising turned out to be far more complicated, not just for Tunisians, but for all those who took part in the Arab awakening. Tunisia's democratically chosen leaders, including Minister Brahim, and Tunisia's many friends in the international community, including the United States, have their work cut out for them. Tunisia is facing today some significant challenges. Those challenges include the glaring, tragic, and destabilizing situation in Libya, the larger destabilization of the region, and the aftershocks from the human tragedy in the Levant. They also include Tunisia's domestic inheritance. Socioeconomic issues, governance issues, and security threats continue to loom. As the economy has struggled, in particular last year, following a series of horrific terrorist acts, Tunisians understandably have grown frustrated. And yet, despite provocations from militant groups, Tunisians, by and large, are sticking with their country and with their decision for pluralism and democratic government. In our conversations with policymakers and diplomats in Washington, in Brussels, in Paris, in Berlin, and other capitals, my co-authors and I have heard of their commitment to Tunisia. Important new pledges of assistance have been made just in recent months. This is all encouraging, but it is just not enough. The report we are releasing today, the product of intense and focused research and consultations over the past 6 months, is not intended to reinvent the wheel, either in terms of the required international assistance or in terms of reforms needed in Tunisia. Tunisians know very well what they need to do. The report is not meant to be a Washington directive or prescription, and it does not intend to offer a cure-all for Tunisia's ills. What this report tries to do, however, is to offer pragmatic suggestions of how to facilitate the process of and help build the capacity needed to implement what Tunisians themselves agree must be done. The paper focuses on one specific aspect of Tunisia's challenges, the economy. Political and security issues are extremely important as well, but Tunisians themselves have worked very hard on their new political system. Still a work in progress for sure, and the international community has been very much seized of the security issues generated by regional turmoil. It is the economy and how Tunisians and international players can cooperate more effectively to ensure that economic progress bolsters the political transition, to which we devote particular attention in this paper. I hope that you will all read the paper and enjoy it, but let me just outline very quickly the main takeaways. We are calling in this report for a new framework for partnership, a new compact between Tunisia and its international partners. We identify 5 areas where reciprocal commitments and actions among Tunisia and its international partners could generate the mechanisms, approaches, and concrete support necessary to help jumpstart progress. First, international players should intensify engagement with and assistance to Tunisia on urgent economic priorities. Frankly, I am astonished at the lack of focus there is on Tunisia as compared to Libya, Syria, and other countries among key international players with a strong and clear interest in the country's success. Of course, all need to stop wars and combat security threats. But there should, at the same time, be a much clearer focus on bolstering the one positive opportunity in the Arab world. Second, the government of Tunisia, for its part, should lead the establishment of a coordination mechanism among donors from the G7 and beyond to establish transparency, accountability, and follow-through. Too much donor assistance is not being spent effectively. Third, the government of Tunisia should play on the country's clear strength in pluralism, dialogue, and consensus building by launching an inclusive dialogue with all stakeholders in the country about public policies and new laws in order to rebuild citizen trust. Fourth, Tunisians will need to advance reforms that can remove the significant remaining obstacles to revitalizing the economy, particularly in marginalized regions. Although the revolution upgraded Tunisia's regime hardware from an authoritarian to a democratic government, Tunisia still needs to finish transforming its operating system of state institutions, laws, bureaucracies, courts, and police. And fifth, as part of this Tunisian-led partnership, the government should carry through on plans to establish a fast-track mechanism to implement projects aimed at fostering economic and social development and creating jobs. Reform of the overall system will take a matter of years, which is understandable and to be expected. But Tunisians need to experience relief and hope now in a matter of months, not years. Rather than mutual cynicism and recriminations, the defining elements of this new effort should be mutual responsibility and mutual accountability, as well as pragmatism and prioritization. International partners should be prepared to increase and intensify their assistance, including through support to labor-intensive industries in Tunisia that can create jobs and visible results. If Tunisia is prepared to advance public administration, investment, and customs reforms, its partners should provide the necessary advice and expertise, as well as the support to cushion the inevitable dislocations. We are not, God forbid, calling for a repeat of the Deauville experience, the 2011 international conference that promised much and produced relatively little. But there are several important international gatherings coming up. This week's World Bank and IMF meetings, the G7 summit in late May, and a planned economic conference in Tunisia in the autumn that offer the opportunity to operationalize this idea of mutual commitments if the players believe it is useful. And precisely because Tunisians are writing their own future, we cannot afford to ignore their words and their sacrifice. We are very fortunate this morning to have the privilege of hearing directly from a distinguished Tunisian who is helping write that future, Minister of Development, Investment and International Cooperation, Yassine Brahim. Few Tunisians have a more intimate view of the country's development needs. Few have done more over the past few years to seek to realize those needs. And few Tunisians have engaged more intensively or exhaustively with the country's international players than Minister Brahim. Minister Brahim is not only a distinguished public servant, but also an experienced business leader. He has that unique capacity to bridge the divide between government and the private sector and between Tunisia and the world. He and his team have been leading the charge in crafting the Tunisian government strategic plan. The authors of this paper learned a great deal from the minister and his team, and I'm certain that all of us will benefit greatly from his perspective and vision for Tunisia. I hope you will all join me giving a very warm welcome to Minister Yassine Brahim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muasher. First of all, I would like, thanks to David Burns and all the Carnegie team, Ambassador Pierce, Alexander, the excellent work done on Tunisia, and to thank you as well to have given me the opportunity to be with you today to participate to the enrichment of the debate and this Zoom, I would say, on this new democracy under building in a quite sensitive region. I think that we had a lot of exchange when the team was working, because we were delivering at that stage the orientation note and how we see the 5 coming years within the country. And we worked on it with, of course, the civil society, the MPs in the parliament, and the main 4 parties that are supporting the current government. And the diagnosis was really important. Diagnosis about the economical and social model of Tunisia before the revolution, and all what happened during the 5 last years, and why we were at the stage, and we are at that stage of having not started what we call it the economical and social revolution. Tunisia succeeded after the revolution to build a society where Bourguiba concentrated on education, healthcare, building the country, the infrastructure. But the economical model in the 15 years before the revolution was saturated. We have educated people. 30% of the young people that went to the university are without employment today, frustrated. And I suppose that some of you read quite a good article in the NewYorker.com a few weeks ago that was explaining this situation of frustration of the young people of Tunisia globally, and all what and the impact of that, of course, within Tunisia and all over the world. After the revolution, we had a lack of stability, politically speaking. We made the choice to start from a white paper and build a new constitution and ask ourselves which kind of society we want to have. We are still sometimes asking that. But we spent 4 years in, of course, political debates and reaching a compromise on the constitution, and that had a cost. The cost today is we haven't been able to make the reforms, the structural reforms, economically speaking, socially speaking, at the right speed. And there is really a lack of passions. Passions that we had to buy in the 5 last years. All the programs, all the international financing, etc., went to employment in the public sector, which is not the most efficient way, of course, to improve an economy, and also increase of salaries on the pressure, of course, of the social injustice that we have, and especially the lack of developments in the main developed regions in the country. What I liked in your report and the new work is really that the situation is clearly presented and some pragmatic solutions and approaches are proposed in the report. What are the 5 pillars that we presented in the orientation note? First of them are the governance. We have a big problem of governance today within the country. The state was not strong in the 5 last years, still not strong today, and stable, which of course increased corruption all over all the state organization. A lot of things are mentioned in the report. What is maybe lacking, if I can, is the justice system, which is really important in any state of law and a new country, and we have a lot to do in that area as well. We don't have a consensus about the role of the state, and especially the government. And we don't have a consensus, especially with the union, about it. We have an issue on that. Some people continue to think that we can do a lot with the public sector and the state. I don't believe so. So all the projects that will concern public-private partnership, etc., we have a resistance. We still have a resistance today, but thanks to the ambition of the strategic plan and all the requests that we have in terms of project, we won't have a choice. We need to push PPPs in the power station. We need to push PPP in the salination projects. We need to push PPP in the waste management projects. But we will have some resistance, especially from the union on that, because there is an ideology about the fact that the state should stay over there. And if the state will stay, that means more power, of course, to the union in that area. And this is not sufficiently as well maybe mentioned, because it has to be maybe diplomatically correct, but politically we are having topics and discussions about that. Governance, the first point. The second one is the second pillar of the strategy is how to enhance the value added of the economy and how to make Tunisia as a hub. We have a quite extraordinary geographical positioning between Europe and Africa, North Africa and the Middle East. And we are having more and more, especially in some sectors like the ICT, like the automotive industry, like the aeronautic industry. I'd have to leave a few at 10:05 to go to visit Boeing, that is thinking about maybe having some work in Tunisia. So we have so many international companies that are coming to Tunisia and considering Tunisia as a hub for the region. And we have, in fact, the level of the engineering, the technicians, etc., that we could push this momentum using Tunisia as a hub. The third pillar concerns the human development. As you know, Tunisia invested a lot in the Arab countries, and Tunisia, the role of the women in Tunisia is important. 60%, 62% of the students in the universities are ladies, young ladies. Women are having more and more responsibilities. In our electoral also law for the parliament, we had some obligations about gender. We need to improve more because we have just 28% of the workforce that are women in Tunisia, so we can't allow them. There is an improvement of the educational system because the employability of the young people getting out from the university is not good at all today. So there is ambitions of improvement in that, and it's an axis where the international community is helping and could help largely more. The fourth pillar, we have two countries within the country, the coast and the western regions. And in that, our diagnosis is that we are not connecting enough the western regions, and we are not having enough trade with Algeria in the west to enhance the prosperity and the level of life in the west region. And we have a lot of ambitions in terms of projects, in terms of infrastructure in the 5 coming years to link these western regions to the coastal regions and the ports especially. The last and not the least axis is the green economy. We have difficulties about natural resources in Tunisia, especially water, power, of course, and the land. On the water, we have a strategy that is deployed today. We are going on the coast to have desalination projects, and we are going to bring water from the north to the center of the country, but we have just 400 cubic meters per capita in Tunisia compared to an average in the world of 1,000 cubic meters. So it's really a stress situation on the water. That's why we have a lot of project of infrastructure concerning water. On the power, we are late on the renewable energies. We are just at 3% of production of renewable energy in Tunisia, of our needed power production, and we are aiming to go to 12% in 2020. We are as well really late on the waste management and the communal management of the waste globally all over the country. So these are the 5 axes. And the good news is when we converted this strategic orientation note to a strategic plan, we had so many requests of projects coming from the regions, of course, and coming from all the ministry all over the government. And now we are finalizing at the final stage of the arbitrage, in fact. To give you just an idea, it's a small country, We spent on the public investment, public sector, we spent around $10 billion in the 5 last years. We had requests for $30 billion coming from the regions and the departments. And if we, of course, we want to keep an acceptable, of course, macroeconomic balance, we'll be able to produce 15 to 17, 18, depending on the financial conditions that we'll have with our partners, of course. To finish about the relationship with our international partners, we are really grateful that we had, even if it's not enough, we had very good support from the international community in the 5 last years. We feel that the international community wants Tunisia to succeed. It was not easy to support a country that was not stable at all, that in 2013 was not far from a chaotic situation. So we had our partners with us, US, of course, European Union, and all the European countries, and all the international multilateral organizations. Was it enough? Were we producing at the right speed? The answer is no. Of course, in terms of execution, we were not efficient, but there are several reasons. Governance in the region, especially on the project, and governance of the projects was not sufficient. International community is always, of course, asking of speed of reforms. When you don't have a stable political situation in a country, it's not easy to have the right speed in terms of reforms. We are supposed to have now a more stable situation, but it's not sure 100%. We have a kind of not natural association today in terms of power, political power, and of course this generates time to time some problems. But there is also the number of laws that are coming to the parliament. A parliament that, and you mentioned that in your report, parliament that has to put the right tools, to have more means, to accelerate, to be able to study correctly all the laws. But also, we need not to forget that we haven't finished building what we agreed on the Constitution. Especially, we have just this year voted the Constitutional Court law, the Justice Council law. We are going to vote the decentralization law. We are going to have elections in the municipalities. This have an impact, of course, on what's going on in the parliament and the political map. And if in the same time we need to have the PPP law, we need to have the investment code law, we need to have the banking law, we need to have the central bank law, we need to have the bankruptcy law, etc. Hey, are you going so fast in the US between the Congress and the government? So we have to have in mind, of course, we need to reform, of course, we need to have the right speed, etc. But we need also the international community to consider that it's a new democracy. We want to go as fast as possible. We will go as fast as possible. But you need to understand that there is also reality and there is a political life that is under building in Tunisia. And we hope that will be successful because really there is one thing that we cannot, I'm quite confident on it in Tunisia. We had a revolution for freedom and we had a revolution for prosperity and dignity, like you said in the report. Freedom, now, we cannot feel that Tunisia can go back on that. Question is that how to put really the boat on the right road in terms of enhancement of the social situation within the country. That's, of course, our responsibility first. We need to accelerate, we need to reassure, and for that we need your support and all what you proposed in terms of governance and how we can handle this relationship between the international community and the executive power in Tunisia and the parliamentary power in Tunisia and even the civil society. It's quite good because it's been proven on the security side. I think that's a very good idea to have a pragmatic, fast-track process of delivery in the 5 coming years. We hope that we'll encourage even more that on the 25th in April when we will be in Tunisia and see how we can put that in practice afterwards. Thank you very much.
Please. Thank you very much. Minister Brahim has to leave at 10, and so in that vein, I'm going to forfeit my right to ask questions and go directly to the audience. If you maybe can, let's entertain 3 questions at a time. Please make it short and identify yourself. So, please.
Mohamed from the Voice of America. The United States has been a staunch supporter of the Tunisian revolution. What are you expecting to get in terms of assistance from the United States?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Morning, Jeff Picard from USAID. Minister, you mentioned decentralization as a key component, and it seems like your ministry and the Ministry for Local Affairs are probably the 2 most important ministries in this approach. What is your thought in terms of the 5-year plan and teed up with that in terms of ensuring transparency and accountability for development projects as they move out to the interior?
Okay. Other questions? Yes, please.
Ali Kamel from Creative Associates. I haven't seen like a pillar for youth while you're saying there is a 60% or more and the unemployment is very high, as well as the mismatch between skills in the labor market.
Maybe we can start with these.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, concerning the United States, in fact, the United States has supported Tunisia during the last years in several ways. Of course, we enhanced the amounts of concrete financial support in some projects, and especially the grant support for Tunisia, but also the guarantee given by the United States as a state for the issues that we had in the capital market globally. And of course, the United States is one of the most important shareholders of the multilateral organization, where it is the World Bank, the IMF, and as you know, we had several programs, one program with the IMF, but several programs with the World Bank during the last year. So we had the support from the United States, and still have good support from the United States, of course. Is it enough? Never enough. And the unique point that maybe we haven't succeeded in the last period of time to reach with the United States, because the United States had to discuss several important trade agreements with other regions in the world, is this question of the FTA. So Minister Muasher knows about it. He's done it for his country a few years ago. It's of course, Tunisia is a small country. We won't have any risk for the US market about the Tunisian products, of course, but we are starting to have troubles about, especially in the textiles industry, about it, in fact, not having an access to the US market as a free market for Tunisian products, especially when we have people that are ordering from the Tunisian companies, in fact, for a global world, is a problem. It's starting to be a serious problem. And in the other way around, when we have American companies that will sell in Tunisia, it's not a very large market, so we are assuring people in the Tunisian side that it's not important. The FTA, if we start to discuss about it, that's also a signal for American investors to come to Tunisia. It's important that for any country that make any FTA with the US, it means that really we have the environment that is sufficiently open and competitive to the US investors. And then for this idea of using Tunisia as a hub for the regions, having really an FTA for Tunisia with the USA is important, especially also when we have some competitors in the region that have FTA and we don't. So that's, I think, one of the axes in terms of potential enhancement of the relationship in the future with in the short future, I hope, with the USA. In terms of transparency and accountability, of course, when I spoke about the governance, the first pillar of the governance, that's what I mean. In fact, one of the problems that we have with with a lack of confidence between the citizen and let's say the administration globally concern that topic. And main of the social movement that we had in the last, let's say, even 2 years or 3 years, were mainly about when the public sector has to employ, and we don't have transparency of the process, in fact, because for any position you have always 20, 30 times requests compared to what we offer, and then the transparency is not there. But the problem now is that we need to use technology as well for that, and we have started to use technology more and more for that, because the people in charge are fearing about it. And we have even investors that sometimes in some regions they don't call for recruitment because they are fearing about the number of people that will come for the position and how they will create unhappiness at the end compared to what they are proposing. So really we need to use more and more technology to have transparency and to be completely accurate on that process. So we are in the government, we have a project of OpenGov, of course, and we have the Minister of Finance will assist with Undersecretary Novelli today talking about what we are doing in that area. We are doing a lot, and with your help, of course, and we are aiming to do even more and more. And ICT is one, and technology will be one of the axes to really enhance those processes. Of course, there is not a pillar for the youth because the youth are everywhere. In fact, all what we are doing is for them. When we are talking about enhancing the value added in the economy, that means that we want to bring more opportunities to educated people in our economy globally. When we are talking about employability, we need really to have to push more professional training and not having people in the universities in area that are not committed to what the market is asking for tomorrow. We are bringing more culture and sport in the educational system to have citizens that are less, more open and less potentially attracted with all what's happening, because our openness, of course, we are open completely, but we are open also to the extremist groups as well. And so the idea is really to invest more on the culture and sport in the education system to open our young people to all what's happening in the world. When we are talking about decentralization and having several decision-making processes that are close to the people, we have the average age in Tunisia 31 now. So the opportunity will be for the young people. And the best measurement of success of the policy will be the bringing back hope on the future, because the young people in Tunisia, the youth, are conscious that not everything will be corrected in few years. But the idea is to see signals that, the machine is restarting and there is hope on the future about what's happening in Tunisia.
Please.
Natalie Panedo, Exima LLC, please. Thank you for coming and speaking about Tunisia and giving more explanation and about situation from inside the country. I have some question for you. So for the export and import company, which is the best way to start working with Tunisia? And if you have any Tunisian government agencies that can assist on it? Thank you.
Thank you. Munji Dawadi from the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy. Welcome to DC, Your Excellency. My question is, looking at the report and the new framework that it's offering for Tunisia to get out of this economic crisis, how do you envision putting that in action? And also talking about your own strategy vis-a-vis the other major political parties and vis-a-vis also the other major political player that's not a political party, which is the UGTT. I mean, it has a significant presence in the political life in Tunisia and probably a veto on some of the major initiatives that the government might try to put forward.
Okay. Please, Ambassador Cutler.
I'd just like to return to the first question and maybe be a little more specific. What is our government, has our government doing enough, our congressional support and so on? And do you have any specific goals for what to expect from us? And how can our organizations like Carnegie and others help out?
I want to add a question of my own since I think I have the opportunity now. Does Tunisia feel, I mean, there is of course a lot of domestic pressure to succeed, but does Tunisia feel a regional pressure to succeed and, present an example of a successful transition to democracy, not just politically, but economically as well? Is there such a pressure within the Tunisian population, or are you all focused on making Tunisia succeed internally?
Regional, you mean in the North
Arab
Africa?
world. I mean, becoming an example for the Arab world in how to achieve, peaceful transitions to democracy.
So for the trade and all the investment globally in Tunisia and environment, we have a foreign investment promotion agency, FIPA, that you will find on the web, of course, and of course the embassy here is completely connected to all our agencies in charge of that, and we can of course explain to you how you could proceed very quickly on the political question. Yes, of course, that's a permanent question, of course, and the idea is really we had a problem with the first party, and since November, October, that won the election in 2014, then imploded partially, in fact, at least in two parts today, and that created really an issue, in fact, in the country, because it's been long and now we are quite desperate to have it back. So the idea is really that created a balance that is different, in fact, in the parliament, especially, and we are working on it. In fact, we are working on it and how to rebalance back, because we have the perspective, of course, of the municipal elections, and really to have, even if we have a kind of association in the country, we still have kind of three political powers. In fact, now we have the left, extreme left, with the support of the union at certain stage. We have the Islamist, of course, political party, and we have this center, in fact, modernist, that is completely now divided in three or four forces, and political forces. So the idea is that it's moving. There are discussions, and there is a consensus globally in the country, in fact, that we cannot offer today a fight, in fact, a political fight in front of the challenges that you are facing, but at the same time, the consensus cannot be a block. It has to be a pusher and not a blocker for the development, in fact, and that's why we need a discussion, of course, with the union. We don't have any problem with globally within the parties that are supporting the government about the program, the role of the state, etc. Maybe the problem will be more in the relationship with the union, and also we need to discuss about the priorities time to time in terms of reforms and speed of reforms globally. So it's not 100% perfect, but we move on the right direction each time we needed to do it. But for the future to accelerate, we need really to have a clear position with the union, especially about how to manage the role of the state, especially, and to accelerate the use of the PPP projects, for example. For the support, we think that we have area of enhancement, especially on the security side, because security doesn't concern just Tunisia. That's the region. All what's happening in Libya is so important for us, and we've been. I saw the numbers in the 5 last years, especially in terms of investment. We made arbitrage in 2014, especially, and 15 for all the security budgets that we took from the economical infrastructure budget, of course, in Tunisia. So having more support and more means and more ability, not just to coordinate, but also material and financial, in fact, support from the United States on the security side is important. We are going that path, and especially with 2 or 3 countries from the G7 under G7 kind of governance together with the security forces in Tunisia and defense forces. But I think that there is area for improvement and enhancement in terms of capacity and capabilities and support of the US Congress. On the economical side, I guess that we were not far. We've been discussing another support in terms of going to the market with the guarantee of the US, but it's been scheduled in the end of last year. But we needed to achieve some goals in terms of reforms that haven't been achieved, and now we are discussing again, depending on the program of the IMF. So we hope that we have an agreement on that area as well to accelerate the support, because we are reaching now a debt that is close to 60%, especially when you integrate all the also public companies. So it's a level that could become dangerous for Tunisia if for example, the Brent goes to $60-70. It will be really a problem for us. So we need really to have a less costly debt if we want to accelerate, in fact, in terms of delivery of projects. Do we have any regional pressure to succeed? That's a difficult question. We have quite good relationship with our neighbors, with Algeria, especially on the security side, and Algeria wants Tunisia to succeed, at least doesn't want Tunisia to become another problem, of course, but we are coordinating together, of course, because we have I mean, the fight against terrorism, we have, of course, some issues in the borders, and we are really coordinating very well. We are also coordinating together with all the regions, not just Algeria, all the countries, Egypt as well, about all what's going on in Libya, of course, with the international community, with Europe, of course. Do we have a support from the Gulf countries? We do. It's largely not comparable to Egypt or Morocco, of course. We are not we are not a kingdom, but for the moment we have a support. We have a support in terms of multilateral funds and infrastructure financing, etc., from some Gulf banking organization.
Maybe we have room for one or two more questions. Please, the gentleman in the back.
Just one quick question. Do you have any information on the latest status of tourism in Tunisia? Are there any bright spots there?
Ambassador McNee here.
Marwan made a very persuasive case why Tunisia is so important. If I could flip Marwan's question, looking back on the past 5 years, what lessons would you draw from the transition that are applicable to those elsewhere in the region who are pushing for and believe in reform? What's the main lesson you would draw that would be helpful elsewhere?
Please.
Tourism, unfortunately, I do. Unfortunately, it's really catastrophic. It's in the first quarter, which is not normally a quarter of tourism, but we are at minus 60% already. We had the second half of the year at minus 50% in terms of course, flow, and then in terms of expenses. The unique country that really people were here is Algeria. In fact, we have 1.4 million Algerians coming to Tunisia in last summer, which was encouraging. And now we are trying to diversify, of course, and we have some countries that are interested today in Tunisia, and maybe will be here this summer, especially Russia, because Russia will have less tourists in Turkey, in Egypt, with all what happened, of course, in 2015. The European, in fact, pulled it back a lot, because we had around 2014, we had around 4.5 million European coming in Tunisia, and we went down to 2.5 in 2015, and maybe it will be even less in 2016, which is impacting, of course, the direct tourism industry, especially the hotels, but also all what is around, transport, restaurants, etc. So really in our projections, that's why in 2016 we are projecting just 2% of growth, which will be above the average growth of the 5 last years of 1.5%, but that will be really a restart. So what we hope is that we won't have any other big issues in terms of terrorism, of course, or security, and then to have confidence coming back in the beginning of 2017. But we don't have any large hopes on tourism in 2016 for the moment. For the second question about the 5 last years and the lesson that for the country, I mean, it's quite exceptional in Tunisia, and depending on the countries, because Morocco has a specific path that is going. I won't comment Morocco, but going. I mean, there is election. There are elections in Morocco this year that are very important to see how things will move in Morocco after the municipalities election. And we are following really closely, and especially the political map, in fact, in Morocco, how it's evolving. Libya is quite specific now. Libya, we need to concentrate on how to get weapons, maybe not out, but with less impact, and to structure a country and to start to have a kind of a state. Egypt is quite specific. So, and when you go to the Middle East, there is so many specificities. Tunisia is that it's coming, it came from a strong, let's say, at least civil society, then political parties, and we had our difficulties. We were really not far from. I was in 2013 as a head of political party, really in the action. The national dialogue success is quite specific. So we have a good chance to succeed. We are still fragile because of the non-delivery on the economical and social side, and because of the security risks that we still face, of course, in front of a non-stable geostrategic environment globally. But we feel that having done all what we have done in the 5 last year, we don't have an internal risk of lack of stability in Tunisia, where maybe in a few other countries the risk is still more important.
Minister Brahim, thank you very much for a very rich discussion, and thank you for helping us launch this very important initiative for us, and I hope for you too. Please join me in thanking Minister Brahim.
Thank you very much.
I will work with you.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much.
How you doing, man? Good to see you. Hey, good to see you. How you doing?
How's everything?
All right.
I was wondering if I could ask you your permission for something.
Sure.
The Deputy Secretary wanted to talk a little bit about TAFE in his speech when he comes.
Okay.
I wanted to sort of say how we're investing in outside of Tunis.
Yeah.
Is it all right if we just mention, Louise told me where a couple of the projects were? Is it okay if we
Yeah,
mention
but I think, but absolutely, you can use anything that from the numbers Louise gave you. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on the private sector contribution and role. My name is Mohamed Malouche. I'm the board chairman of the Tunisian American Young Professional, which is a diaspora organization that has been focusing on increasing economic cooperation and partnerships between Tunisia and the United States, in particular in terms of education, entrepreneurship, exports, and exchanges. So what we're going to do in the next hour and 15 minutes is discuss the role of the private sector and how the private sector can contribute to catalyze the process of reforms in Tunisia and how it could contribute to, frankly, bringing back some hope, some optimism in the situation in Tunisia. We obviously want to be very candid about the difficulties, the issues, the constraints that exist. But we also want to be very positive in terms of, incremental steps that the private sector can undertake, and frankly, a leadership role that the private sector ought to take, especially in light of some of the very pragmatic organizational, operational, and policy recommendation that Carnegie has made in this report. I want to salute the efforts of Carnegie. This was a tremendous amount of work. In the fields, I've seen the team in action, and I can testify that, frankly, I've rarely seen such an amount of dedication, of energy, frankly, of passion, into putting together. So we ought to take advantage of this momentum and this energy and this dynamic to try collectively, and in particular in terms of the private sector, do everything we can to move things forward. So I'm happy to introduce our panel. And I'm going to start with Samia Msadek, who is a director in the governance global practice at the World Bank. She's in charge of public resource mobilization and management, as well as financial management in member countries. She's had a long, distinguished career at the bank. But before joining the bank, she was a consultant. She was an accountant. She worked for Arthur Andersen in Tunisia. And I'm happy to tell you that Samia is the first Tunisian woman who has been appointed as a director at the World Bank, and only the second Arab woman in this position. So we're very proud of you. On my immediate right, Naceur Hidoussi is also a Tunisian success story. He's the CEO of Hexabyte, that is the fourth largest ISP, Internet Service Provider in Tunisia. He has founded Hexabyte upon his return from the United States to Tunisia. He is also a vice president at AmCham, the Tunisian American Chamber of Commerce, in charge of fundraising. And he's finally also an angel investor and very involved in grooming and enhancing the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Tunisia. So welcome, Naceur.
Thanks.
And then Bo Cutter is the chairman of the Tunisian American Enterprise Fund, which is a fund that has been put in place by the US government to support the Tunisian private sector and SMEs in particular. Bo is also the director at the Roosevelt Institute. He was a managing partner at Warburg Pincus, which is one of the large private equity firm in Wall Street. He was also a managing partner at Coopers & Lybrand. And he served in various government roles. He ran ONB, the Office of Management and Budget, and he was also a senior economic policy advisor to President Clinton. So that's our panel, and I want to start with some sort of baseline discussion around the reforms and the topic of reforms and the pace of reforms. One of the comments that Minister Brahim has made around sort of the difficulty to reform in Tunisia, there was an expectation after the election of 2014 that with a government that's no longer an interim government, with four political parties that are forming that government that, in big terms, really agree on the economic policy and the economic reforms that need to be put in place, and with a majority in parliament, that reforms, there was an expectation that reforms will actually, move quickly. Unfortunately, it's not the case for a variety of reasons. And so I wanted to ask our panelists, and maybe I'll start with you, Bo, from your perspective as an investor, what is your assessment of the economic landscape today in Tunisia, and what are the types of measures and the types of actions that you would want to see as an investor be done?
Let me hit 3 points, and I will not begin, largely because Mohamed has promised me that I'd get a chance at another point about saying what it is the Enterprise Fund is doing. And before I even do that, the first I wanted to do is say that an important part of Mohamed's resume that he has not mentioned is he is also on the board of the Tunisian American Enterprise Fund, and he's an extremely valuable member of that board. And the second point is I want to congratulate Carnegie both on the report and on the op-ed page piece that came out today. I have been involved off and on with the report since its inception, and I thought the op-ed page piece was really an extremely good summary of it for those millions of people who won't actually read the full report. Let me make 3 points. The first is that when you look at the Tunisian economy from a hard-eyed macro perspective, it is a low investment economy in comparison to the kinds of investments as a percentage of GDP that economies in roughly the same shape as Tunisia, by that I mean roughly the same per capita income, make. In fact, it invests by about 10% of GDP. If you then say that in trade terms, not in purchasing price parity terms, but in trade terms, the Tunisian economy is about $35 billion. That 10% of that is $3.5 billion a year of investment that's not being made. That's an enormous gap. And so point one, I won't bore you with more on that, although I'm happy to go into more on that. Point one is that until there's more investment in the Tunisian economy, and I mean from internally within Tunisia, never on earth has foreign direct investment actually solved a country's problems. So it's internal to Tunisia. Tunisia is going to limp along at 1.5% to 2% a year. And that's just a fact. Point two is that we invest, and therefore I talk most to small and medium enterprise CEOs inside of Tunis, outside of Tunis, male and female. And most of them feel that what they essentially have to do with respect to the government is placate it so it will leave them alone. They are nowhere near the point of thinking that they're, and remember, these are the proprietors of quite small businesses. So maybe the big businesses feel quite differently, but the ones I deal with are nowhere near the point of thinking or hoping that the government would actually, over a period of time, do a series of productive things for them. The third point is one that's mentioned all the time, but where I actually think that there is an enormous amount that can be done that would bridge the political divides, and it's the lack of transparency in the government. And I was really very pleased to hear in the first session some really quite interesting thoughts about that and about the use of technology in it. If I get a chance, I'll enlarge on that. But I think one of the ways to begin really to catalyze investment and reform in the Tunisian economy is to make it vastly clearer than it is today on what it is the government actually does. And I'll stop.
Certainly, the role of the government was something that Minister Brahim was
Yes.
talking about, and it's subject to debate in Tunisia because there are, a whole range of variety of opinion on that. Naceur, I would ask you the same sort of question around constraints and around what the private sector, in your opinion, could do to accelerate the process of reforms. Your view as an entrepreneur and as a private sector leader.
First of all, I will share a story which give you an idea about the mood in Tunisia. I had to take a cab a couple of days ago, and the taxi driver was complaining about how life is getting difficult, how he has to work 12 to 14 hours a day, how he started missing the Ben Ali's days. And before I leave the car, he asked me this one question that kept looping on my mind until now. He told me, sir, if democracy is so good, why do we feel so bad? So, and I will build on that. So, there is an immediate reforms that needs to be done, and we feel this bad mood even for the private sector. A lot of money has been spent, but I'll give you 2 points. We need quick, fast, quick win reforms. I mean, the government has been working on deep transformations that we will probably see result in many years, but we're lacking on quick win reforms where citizen will get will see the result as soon as possible, because we cannot wait any more time. Second thing, you mentioned in a nice word the lack of transparency. I will call it corruption. I mean, we lost 3. I mean, there's corruption is growing in Tunisia, and we created an anti-corruption team, but we didn't give right tools to this team. I mean, in my opinion, there is an immediate need to create an uncorruptible elite team composed of police, national guards, people from IRS. We need to train them, capacity building, give them top technology items to do the job. We should give them full access to intelligence data, bank account, IRS files. They should be under they should be independent from any government entity. And just to, I'm gonna also share another story with you guys. There is a notorious smuggler who's known as Banana, because he made his fortune smuggling banana from between Libya and Tunis, and between Algeria and Tunis in the Ben Ali days. And this gentleman is a top donator for the 2 parties who's ruling the country today. So what kind of signal is being sent to the hard-working, honest men? So what signal is being sent to the private sector? So again, I'm thinking loud. I mean, the speech of the private sector is not biased, so it's a honest, direct speech.
That's what we need, absolutely. So So we'll talk about corruption in a second, but I wanted to rebound on one point that you made and ask the question to Samia around capacity building, because it sounds like a lot of what Naceur has said, a lot of what Minister Brahim has said was the difficulties to implement. Whether it's in the parliament level, whether it's the administration level, sometimes there's funding but no capacity and or willingness to implement things. So what is being done in terms of capacity building in Tunisia, and what ought to be done more? What are some of the things that need to be focused on in terms of capacity building? And I'll also ask you about sort of governance and accountability, because it's one of the themes as well that's, I think, near and dear to your heart.
Thank you, Mohamed. Good morning, everybody. Congratulations, Dr. Muasher and the team for an excellent report. I'm very pleased to have this external eye assessing the situation, but this morning also feeling very pleased that our views are converging. What you have summarized in the book is converging with our assessment of the situation. We issued the country diagnostic a couple of months ago, and our country framework, partnership framework, is also ready and under consultation. So we know the issues, and this is what is making the next step difficult. Sometimes you don't know the issue, and then you say, you wonder from where to start. But here we have a fair diagnostic and understanding of the situation. So we need to act. And Naceur, you said quick wins. Yes, well, we need the quick wins. It's a mindset. It's people, they want that. People are impatient. 5 years is a lot. And the scale of the humanity is nothing. And if you see the big achievements, except the Big Bang, they take time. But people are impatient. So how to manage that? And you are touching on governance. Let me tell you, Dr. Muasher knows this very well. When he was in the bank in 2003, I think, we hosted Dubai hosted the World Bank annual meetings, and the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, produced 4 flagship reports for that. And one of them is on governance. It was really the most difficult reports we ever issued, I think, in the bank. Nobody was ready to talk about this. And right away, you think governance, you think corruption, while it's beyond that. So now I'm very happy to see that we talk about governance openly, number one. Number two, it's in the pillar. It's the note strategic of the government, is in the pillar of our strategy, and it's in the report here. So this is already a big step forward. Now the challenge is how to define governance. Sometimes also you can play around. This and governance is extremely complex. It touches on everything on government affairs and citizenship needs. We tried last year, as we created the global practice, the governance global practice group, to try to find a way of explaining it, and maybe this will be relevant to the discussion today. We thought that governance is the system by which you create and approve laws. And for that, 2 elements. It's a citizen-centric. It should be citizen-centric. We don't create law for the law, but we create it to serve the interest of the citizens. And number 2, this governance should be inclusive. And why we are complaining, why we had the Arab Spring and the Tunisian, when they claimed transparency, in fact, and dignity, is this exclusion. They're not treating the different groups in the country equally and inclusively. So this is the dimension that we are trying. So every law is difficult to issue because we need to make sure it's inclusive and fair to everybody. I think that while we are saying that we have a long list, and Minister Brahim listed and said we cannot have all this done overnight. Yes, I agree. But in my view, the struggle, our advantage in Tunisia is that we don't have the ethnicity that other countries are struggling with, because you have 4 or 5 religions, and you don't have a lot of cultural background that is constraining. So then the question is, where is our common ground and what are our differences? Let us start where we have agreement, because everybody will benefit. These are public goods. The laws are producer of public goods to benefit all the citizens. So let us start. These are a little bit the quick wins. The biggest challenge in dealing with governance, if we treat everything in a to-do list, this will take us forever, because everything is important, in fact. But what is more important than, what is essential? And within that, let us define the common ground, things that are so obvious that nobody will challenge. Look, if you improve the management of a hospital, please, who will say no? Who will say no? I don't know. We know, we don't want to enter that area. Yeah, you know it. If you take and start a reform on the education and people feel, you know what, the most important thing for any citizen is his kids or the children that are close to him or her. So saying that I'm investing on this, who will say no? So we need also to think about what is the interest of the citizen. A little bit what is called now, what's for me? If we want really to move and build coalition, we need to take it from that angle of what's for me, what institution that I'm investing on that will benefit the citizen. And then for now, I'm not seeing this nexus there. For now, it's all over because everyone is dealing with the sector. We need really to have this esprit de corps where we think about the common interest and the ground that we need to treat them. It doesn't mean that our to-do list will not will be covered altogether, but really from where to start to create the trust that something is done. Mohamed, when we were preparing for this, I told you I just arrived from Lebanon, and it's really talking about ideology. I was really reflecting. Everybody knows the crisis in Lebanon, no president forever. No parliament meeting for nobody can count now. So the political tensions are just every time I'm impressed, amazed, these things that you cannot even imagine in your mind. Then, but I arrived to Beirut that I am after 7 years, I think. I haven't been there 7 years. And everything is working, perfectly working, including with the refugee issue. 2 million refugees, 50% of the resident population there. And so a new center, impressive. A new marina, you cannot say anything. Everything is working. Dinner, lunch, team dinner on a Tuesday. We arrived at 8, the restaurant was empty. I said, yes, it's Tuesday. When we left at 10, it was full. So then I asked my Lebanese colleague saying, what do you think? Maybe we don't need presidents to rule countries? Because this country is working without the president. So we laughed about that. But what I want to say here is precisely is run by the private sector. The country is run by the private sector. I met with the central bank and the oversight, and I can tell you that the way they are designing this dimension of banking and boosting the economy and financing and supporting the private sector, etc., is just amazing. Their country is run by the private sector. Let me stop here.
Inspiring, I guess. Let me turn to Naceur, and maybe since he took his company from a startup to an SME onto the 4th largest ISP in the country. You know, and maybe he has ambition to run the country as well. But, you know, I want to really know sort of, you know, the issue you traversed and sort of how you overcame them and what kind of lessons you drew out of that experience.
In 2015, we had a major issue with labor union. And again, you know, there's no free lunch. So the fact that having today democracy came with the empowerment of the labor union. We didn't have to deal with this before. And frankly, the demands coming from the union weren't acceptable. They, first of all, they wanted the company to stop paying dividends to shareholders. So because they thought that the company should belong to the workers. So first idea, stop distributing profits and give us 25% raise.
Wow.
And the raise should be given to everybody. That means it's even against the company procedures. We have a metric of performances. So, and they were asking to give the same raise for the less performer to the best performers. And you can imagine that the cell union within our company is composed by the worst performing workers. Then they went into strikes. We have 130 employees. I had to talk to every single employee, but we managed to go through this difficult experience. And the bad thing is we ended firing 3 people and reducing some extra benefits to others. And we had to do it the hard way. But again, I don't want to leave this story with a on a negative way. I mean, if you do business in France, if you do business in Italy, if you do business in Portugal, things are even worse. So we have a new, strong labor union, which is trying to slow down some of the reforms. They're against the PPP. We believe that the private public partnership is the best way to speed up the rebuilding, the transformation in Tunisia, especially on the ICT sector, because this is the sector you can think anywhere, build anywhere, you can sell anywhere. So, and creating a job in this sector is not as expensive as other sectors. I knew that they were slowing down some 3 billion projects that were to be done 100% on a PPP basis. But again, this is the price to pay for having freedom.
And we'll get to that central question of, I think, dialogue and trust in a second. But I want to give the opportunity to Bo to also share his perspective in terms of, again, in terms of sort of helping out. How the fund has this philosophy of trying to, build capacity, build sustainability, try to, focus on best practices so that the ecosystem of investment actually benefits. How are you doing that?
Before I do that, let me do 2 things. The first is say that I'd almost rather not talk for the rest of the panel and listen to the 2 of you all. It's been fascinating to do it. Then the second is vis-a-vis your Lebanon point, to tell you what's been a constant for, I think, 30 years in polling in the United States. Everybody in the cognoscenti always say how terrible it is that Congress doesn't do any work. When you ask the average American, they think this is a wonderful thing because they feel in general the more work Congress does, the worse off they are. I suspect you'd find the same results if you polled that in Tunisia. Let me talk a little bit about it, about what we're doing and our philosophy. First, I should say that we are an investment organization that's established by the United States government, but we're not a grant organization, we're not a foundation, we're not social workers. We're supposed to invest in businesses and help those businesses succeed. We're going to invest in 3 broad sectors: microfinance, because the bulk of microfinance money goes to the lowest income people in most countries. The second, and for the bulk of our investment, which would, I guess, be almost 2/3, will be in small and medium enterprise. And then finally, that we're gonna join with others in partnership to try to help create an ecosystem for startups in Tunisia. I'd say frankly that's tough. I'm not personally certain that it's possible, but we're gonna give it a try, and we're going to invest in the area. Our sense is that what we can responsibly do are the following things. We can create terms for investment which are appropriate for the small and medium enterprise sector, and are not designed because they're convenient to us. An awful lot of times in countries, the investment terms are created that are convenient to the investor and not to the investee. That's point one. Point two is that we can see our role as centrally helping the entrepreneurs in whom we invest succeed. And we can do that a couple of ways. The first is a sort of Dutch uncle role, which is that we are going to try to bring best governance practice at a corporate level, not at a national level, to the companies in which we invest, because we'll be on the boards of almost all of those companies. So we'll insist on transparency for investors. We will insist that on regular due diligence and due process in terms of how companies work. And we think that redounds both to the success of the companies in which we invest, but also more broadly in the business community. What we would like is that if we invest in a company, that's in a sense a gold star for the company. And that for their next rounds of investment, for their next source of money, they can use the fact that we gave them money and we stayed with them, that we invested in them, not gave them money, and we stayed with them as in a sense a credential to get money elsewhere. And in that way, I think we can leverage the amount of money that we're given. And finally, we're going to focus quite directly and spend money. And this is something that a normal investor wouldn't really be able to do, on making that company individually better. One of the things that we've tried to do is institute a 100-day improvement program in every company that we invest in. And that's not sort of focused on kind of broad conceptual things. It's if you're in a particular, if you're running a company that is a particular kind of management process or manufacturing process, what specifically do you need? What kind of engineering assistance, for example, would make you double the effectiveness of your manufacturing? So we are willing to focus on and spend money on the direct improvement of the companies in which we invest. So I think I'll stop there. I've used up a lot of time, but the general point is we are an investment entity. We believe we have to be responsible investors in the sense of that we invest from the perspective that companies need to learn how to deal with real investors, but we also have to be responsible from the perspective that it's an obligation of ours to help those companies succeed.
Thank you, Bo. I wanted to shift a little bit focus and talk about one of the key aspects, I think, that was brought up in the report. This whole question of, I think, dialogue and trust. Tunisia has sort of a trademark, in terms of being a country that now has built a reputation of being a country where dialogue is possible and has actually yielded results, through compromise, through trade-offs. There was the national dialogue, the Nobel Peace Prize. Yet, on the economic side, things seem to be completely different because of various interests, various views on sort of economic models, some conflictual aspects, with labor unions that you mentioned. So let me start maybe with you, Samia, and ask you about, you talked about Lebanon. In Tunisia, what are some of the ways to regain trust and rebuild trust between the governments, the unions, the private sector? You've done this in many countries, I'm sure. How do you rebuild that trust?
Yeah, so this is a very, very difficult question. I think it's an area where it's very difficult to establish benchmarks for a simple reason. It depends a lot on the political economy. And in each country, in each part of the world is so specific that you need really to think about it in these terms and with the different parameters. But one thing that works really and is powerful is again about the concept of transparency and good governance. Sometimes we do the good thing, but we don't do them well, and or do the right thing, but not the right way. So we do a lot, but we don't talk about it. So people will not read the mind of the politician or the legislators, etc. Of course, I followed a little bit some debates in the TV, etc. Newspaper. It's all about confrontation and not about advocacy. We need more advocacy for what we are, for what we have. Really, this is extremely powerful. We should not hesitate to say the things again and again and again. One very well-known speaker at the World Bank at his retirement party, they told him, you are known as being an excellent speaker, very influential. However, I heard you saying exactly the same thing years and years. He said, yes, because it's not the same audience. So it's like we declared that we approve the law, it's in the Journal Officiel, then that's it, we take it from granted. Everybody is aware. No, it's not true. And we need to say it in a telling story. We need to reach out to the right level, to all the levels. It's very intellectual, very sophisticated. So nobody, no reaching. So when you don't reach out properly, it's also a problem of transparency, because you know my ignorance and you are exactly telling me things that I don't know, then so I cannot even have a debate with you. Number one. Number two, in telling the stories is also, and this advocacy is sometimes telling the benefit of things, but sometimes telling the cost of not doing it. That guys, if you don't do it, this is for your kids and the grandchildren and you name it, whatnot. So let us think about it together. So think about the cost of not doing this or not complying with this. So we don't want any more a police state. This is a gun, we got it. So, and we discovered that we realized that is not the right thing. We need to communicate. This is at the, everybody can do it. So we can help where we have communication specialists, and everything that we do now, we have a citizen engagement component to make sure that we reach out to the citizen explaining why. For example, if you take the World Bank, right after the revolution, they said that the debt odieuse, that, oh, this is Ben Ali who contracted these loans, and then Ben Ali should pay them back to the bank. You know what, I'm still laughing. But I told my colleagues in the bank, this is our fault. We did not communicate. They don't know the role of the bank. They don't know that Tunisia is a member of the World Bank. We are serving our members. And it's not about imposing on them to drain their resources, etc. So it's communication, explaining why you are doing things, why things are difficult to do. And talking about them is extremely important. The other thing that we also learned, look, there are a lot of things that are intuitive. It's very obvious. I need a law on anti-corruption. Who will disagree? I need a law on on any transformation and on managing the energy, on green economy. But okay, we need analytics. We need analytics to explain, to convince ourselves that is a priority, that I need to put my energy, and what are the benefits or the risk associated. I know that with all the work that was done, we are still very fragmented and we are not pulling it together. For example, the minister expressed this morning an important concern, very, very important one, about water. Guess what? In '98, when I joined the bank, the first thing I worked on is the water strategy for Tunisia 2020. I said 2020, oh my God. You know what? I feel that, so 2020 is tomorrow, and you have everything. It's the most serious study I ever seen, done with the partnership with all the donors, etc., led by the World Bank and the Ministry of Water and Agriculture. This is 2020. If you do 1, 2, 3, by 2020 you will reach a level of self-sufficiency, etc. I'm very sad today. I'm very sad to hear that you are at the 400. Now things will be done from scratch, but we have the analytics. Let us start there. There are a lot of studies that were done and were not taken seriously by previous governments. Let us pull them. The knowledge exists. It's what you do with it that is important. And this is our second area when, so that if you don't do that, you can go all over interesting things, but not necessarily meeting your need. And third, the report here, and Dr. Muasher referred to it. I'm happy also that Minister Brahim also referred to it. The partnership for a purpose. A partnership for a purpose. It's beautiful to say we need to partner, but for what? What we want to achieve together? What is the win-win? Then it should, all the donors should coordinate, and it should be led by the government. It can't be the World Bank, it's the chef de file. It's not. It's your interest, my friend. It's your priorities. So you need to put it in the middle and make sure that we are not losing synergies there, and that is coordinated. When it confirms for us the sense of urgency, but of ownership, that they are essential for us as donors and the partners to Tunisia, that we can move. Otherwise, you can push, but at one point, you will not be. You don't feel that you are moving, and you will stop the movement. So these 3 points are extremely important. Tunisia had done a lot. Look, the basic is there again. Is the constitution. Yesterday I was in the parliamentarian meeting, and everybody is referring to how great is the constitution. It's not easy to have. Is the constitution is the heart, is the everything of a society. But starting from that, really let us move. But let us move and communicating, and not the fact that you don't communicate, you cultivate the second guessing. Why he wants to do now the anti-corruption law? Come on. Oh, it means that he wants to destroy the other party. Anyone, we are human beings. If you don't explain to me why you are doing things, I will try to second guess your mind, and I will waste my energy and create more barriers. So communicate, say why, and be evidence-based. Remove the fiction and stay factual, and remove the fiction. All the studies are there. We can use them, we can update them, but they should be evidence-based, saying, guys, this is the reality that we need to face.
Excellent. I want to ask you this sort of something around what you just said. You know, it seems, you know, and Samia outlined that a lot of the interaction between private sector, state, union are around conflict. You know, there's an ask, you know, gives me this license or give me more, you know, salaries, etc. How can that dynamic be changed and sort of be more around constructions and trying to solve a common problem at sort of your level? Is there a way to engage dialogue around construction rather than sort of, you know, perpetuating this antagonism?
Mohamed, we need to understand where is this trust conflict issue is coming from. Mm-hmm. We grew up in a government where we didn't believe figures. And Winston Churchill said one time, the only figure I trust are the one I fake myself. So this is the kind. So this is a kind of government and we grew up. I mean, dealing with that. So now, how to build this trust? Again, I think that politicians oversold the revolution. So. And Marwan, Mark, and Alex, you used disillusion word. This is, I mean, you understood it. This is a disillusion. Okay. It's easy. I mean, if you want to fight corruption, do something about it. If you wanna, the corruption is taking 2% GDP growth. That's 30,000 jobs that the government can create. I mean, do something about it. If you wanna quick wins reforms, okay. I mean, we private sector give you a list of quick win reforms. Okay, do something about it. Then you have this amazing thing happening in this small part of the world, which is you have a massive civil society life that you can use to be the link between your government and the people. So use it, because the civil society is asking for that. And get the civil society and get the private sector involved in your decision. We truly believe that the next economy should be a private sector led economy, and the government should just be a policymaker. I think there's no. I mean, those are the ingredient. I mean, and again, I will jump on what Samia said. And communicate. You need better communication. So
let me rebound on exactly that, because I think we all agree that there's a need for a certain level of dialogue between everybody, civil society, private sector, state, union, etc. But Bo, you have government experience. You know, how do you balance the need for dialogue and the need for swift action for these quick wins?
Let me try something out. And I'll start with two learnings of mine. One that both are things I should have always known, but I didn't. And one has to do with U.S. experience, and the second is somewhat more of a Tunisian experience, and I'll expand on it. For better or for worse, the roles that I've played in the public sector have always involved intense negotiations with everybody in sight. If you run the U.S. budget, that's the only thing you do all day is defend yourself. And in a very long time ago, in one of the first dialogue meetings, we called it that I led with elements of the private sector, I asked a friend after it was over how the meeting had gone, and he was in business and someone I'd known for a long time, and he said it was a typical government meeting. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, when government says, this is the U.S. government, he said, when government says that it wants to have a dialogue with you, what it means is we want you to sit and be quiet while we tell you what to do. I don't think there are very many governments that are different from that. The second is why in Tunisia it is a little bit more intense. Thankfully, in U.S. law, the principle generally is if the law doesn't specifically say you can't do it, then you can do it and you can apologize after the fact. In Tunisia, as I have learned, the law is exactly the opposite. If it doesn't say you explicitly can do it, and if 20 different bureaucrats from 20 different agencies don't agree with that interpretation, then you cannot do it at all. That cost me a year and a half in Tunisia, just specifically. So how do you get around that? And how do you begin to change the incentives of a whole sector of life, which in some respects is government? I think the first thing you have to understand is that there's still going to be conflict. But what you want to do is not move for kind of, we're all going to sing together and put our arms around each other. It's that we're going to fight about constructive things. And I wanted to say, I want to build on your comment and your comment in that respect. We do have enormous tools now that we never had before in terms of transparency. And I think what you want to do is have the government understand that it is in its own interest to make things so transparent that it can be criticized at a detailed level, which will then give people who function at a detailed level the incentive to escape that criticism by actually doing something. And let me give you two examples. One has to do with an issue that the Carnegie Commission raised in its report, and it's public finance and large public projects, and how do you create a rapid action kind of facility? Make it all public. Put every single public contract, and since that's hard, let's put the top 100 out so that it's available to every single citizen in Tunisia. And let them ask the question, why isn't XYZ moving fast? Because then someone has to answer that question. But if they don't have the information, then all the public can really do is seem to whine and gripe in general. But that's not really what they're whining and griping about. They're whining about, why isn't this particular project done? I would try to deal with your water project. You couldn't do this in 1998, but today you could. You could put the entire study out, you could put all the indices out, you could put all the numbers out, and you'd begin to have citizens ask, why isn't my water sufficient? The second has to do with an area that I'm somewhat more directly concerned with now, is investment. It's hard to invest in Tunisia if you're running a small company. The general estimate by the Tunisian government is it's 18 months to start a business. If you're trying to do it from outside of Tunis, you kind of have to give up your life and move into Tunis while you talk to 38 different government agencies of one kind or another to be able to start up a business. And then on every step along the way, you have to, with a small c sense of the term corruption, convince people who ought to be trying to get you to do what you do for free, convince them to let you do it. And that's where the point comes in. If the law doesn't say you can do it, then you can't do it. I'd like to see, and then this is one where we've talked about it, is that we're willing to finance. I'd like to see a real ease of doing business index for Tunisia. One that is based on the actual facts of Tunisia. And I want to congratulate the World Bank, as the World Bank started the ease of doing business indices a while ago, and they are wonderful. But they aren't great for really small countries because the World Bank doesn't have the staff to go way down into the details and build them specifically for those countries. So we're willing to put up some money to do that for Tunisia. We've begun to talk with the Mediterranean School of Business because we're not statisticians, we're not survey experts, but we can find people who are. And then make it all public. Make everything public about why is it so hard to do business in Tunisia. So I conclude, therefore, by saying that if you want to create the kind of pressure on a government that's useful, is make as much public as you possibly can make. Give up the argument, your worry that, gee, we might make too much public. The public might know too much. Give that up, and start making things very, very available. And people, generally being intelligent, will then start asking really useful questions.
Definitely full and open transparency. I want to ask one quick question to either one of you, specifically around sort of the mechanism that was supposed to establish this partnership between public and private entity. This PPP law that's much awaited, that finally was passed in Parliament, but still doesn't seem to be that actionable. Why is that? Why is it not that actionable? Why are people not sort of trying to leverage, and I'll ask you from a private sector and perhaps more from an IFI standpoint.
Ladies first, so Samia, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You give me the time to think.
We need to hear from the ground. I will cover this from the World Bank perspective.
Because that's a tricky question.
Very tricky, yeah.
Okay, I know that there is a law of resistance coming from the left wing, because they think when there is a lack of transparency that it's gonna open doors to corruption. Okay, that's one. Second, we're one of the Hexabyte is also we build tablets, and we're trying to distribute 2 million tablets to the education and transform the way people learn. And of course, the only way to do that is PPP. So, and we had to explain this to the union, because some people from the parliament, the left wing, and again, this is a very complex issue now, because you have a law, and you have a government willing to start working, you have the private sector willing to start working, but there is fear from the government official to sign or to take any decision, because they know that in probably a couple of years, they won't be in the government anymore, and they're afraid to be accountable for that in a couple of years.
Very interesting to hear this perspective. I'm not judging, and if there is a concern expressed by any party in the country, we need to address it, not to deny it. If it isn't there, is in my view coming from a misunderstanding or a lack of trust or this second guessing that I referred to. So we need to understand based on what they are making this statement and what are the risks that they are trying to manage or to avoid, and addressed from that part. I don't think that approaching the way that is I have a law, I'm right, you are wrong, will resolve this. I think that we need to understand the tension. Here, PPP, of course, is very complex operation. I'll talk about it in a second. But in a way, is the government giving up something that is a public sector service delivery to a private sector to achieve it. And this is where the world is heading. The role of the government, according to a little bit our definition, first of all, is to ensure the security of people and the rule of law. Then for me as a citizen, I need to make sure that when I'm in a place, I'm safe and there is enough security and my rights are protected. In case someone is touching on them, I know that there is a way of giving me back. So this is a normal definition that people accept and expect from a government. If this is the role of the government, then we will have the list of the things that the government should not do, doesn't have a comparative advantage. It's very expensive for a government. And here again, I go back to the analytics. In my view, today, the situation is such that no private sector will come with the big tickets to say, because it's very, very difficult to invest and put your money with your hand on your heart and say, this is the saving of my children. I will put it very difficult to understand that. On the other hand, the government is rushing to it, creating a kind of mistrust coming, then I'm giving up, let the private sector deal, I'm giving up. It's not a giving up, is, as you mentioned, is in charge of the policies. And when the policies are clear, then it's not, the right thing to do is to give it to the private sector. It's known, it's understood that private sector is more efficient. But the government should explain that by doing this, we gain an efficiency, we create jobs, and then I will play my role as a government. Because I need to monitor, I need to oversee all this work. I need to ensure your security. I need to ensure the rule of law. If we don't put it as a win-win, nobody will accept it. Why should I change? I used to go to the hospital and it's public. I give my card and I enter. Now it's, I need to go through the private sector, and all this is a change, a cultural change as well. That should be managed in that. And I need to trust. Then here, Naceur, also maybe the private sector should contribute to build the trust, and that that the private sector is trustworthy to take strategic sector in charge. The private sector is trustworthy to deliver on public sector. Look, people, you don't touch them on health and education. You know what? This is critical. Water, electricity, these are extremely important. Despite the mistrust, they trust the systems of the government. It used to work. The government used to give me electricity. You don't propose anything else to me because I don't know. Already I have a lot of unknowns. You will add to me that my electricity will come from someone who will sell me a card. You see how it is difficult? So then the labor union represents the people, and we need to listen to their concerns. We need also to engage with the group citizens, a little bit of survey saying, what do you think? What do you know? What you don't know, etc. And try to engage. This citizen engagement is extremely important. And here really is a plea for the private sector. If you will lead the country one day and will work for it, and you will be there. But really is this effort of engaging with the citizen as well. Who are your customers in the future? And show that the private sector is here to save the country. Create this power structure, give it a little bit of weight to support the government action, and it will be win-win. Look, I always in this partnership, I refer to the example of Singapore that you all know about, but think a little bit on the details, how they are doing it. You can enter any website, anything that you will see. It's a strong public-private partnership, very, very strong one. It's admirable. It's not love, it's respect, win-win, work together. There is no way that we don't want that we don't work together, and it's really working very well because everything is done. as my background, I'm an accountant and auditor, and it's very, very independent kind of private touch of this. Then you know what, for us, the government is, stay away from me, you affect my independence because I'm the one who will issue an opinion on the finance. And of course, the trend changed after the Enron and all this and the oversight. But this stayed in my mind a lot. And I was really admiring how it operates in Singapore and the professions that I know very well, and how it is effective because of the win-win and the mutual trust. And we know the boundaries and the roles, and they complement each other. There is no interference. What we fear in this partnership is someone has more power than the other, and at what point of the journey will take over. This is what we fear. And if it is the boundaries are clear, the law is quite protective for both. I'm willing to put my money, but I'm willing also to open my doors. Then you oversee that I'm delivering on your strategic roles as a service to the public, as you agreed. Is that equation that should be put. Then we need to engage. It's not easy. It's a new area that is in there. To finish, PPPs, beautiful. We support them. We have a global practice in charge of that. They take the big tickets and the ones that are important, they take a lot of time. It's not a couple of months. It's exactly like any of our operation is a cycle that we want to keep around 1 year. But the real big one is they take time because there are a lot of elements to put in place and make sure it works.
So thank you, Samia. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions from all of you. But before that, just want to get sort of the panel's sentiment about international support in general and this proposed Tunisia-led framework for partnerships that Carnegie has put together that calls for more cross-ministry collaboration, for sort of unique vis-a-vis to the international donor community, for more private sector involvement. And Bo, maybe I'll start with you because you wrote a piece in the Washington Post calling for more support from the U.S. administration, from the G7. How do you feel about this framework and how can it be built upon?
Let me go back to another sort of experience of mine that's really related more to the U.S. government. I ran the National Economic Council for President Clinton in his first term, and as such, oversaw 4 Group of 7, at the time it was a Group of 8, meetings. And we very early tried, we didn't always succeed, to think of them strategically. And there is a strategic sequence that Tunisia can think of. It's the Group of 7 meeting that's in Japan this year in May, I think. Then there's the United Nations General Assembly, the UNGA, in September in New York. And then there is a major investment conference in Tunisia in October, I think. Let's think of that as a package. The process of creating the agenda for the G7 is way it has been working for months and months and months. The G7 meeting members name Sherpas, and the Sherpas meet beginning a couple of years before a particular G7, even though they're held every year, to work out the agenda. So it's not as if it's a blank sheet now. But given the importance, and I think the op-ed page piece made a good point about while we're focusing on the crises, perhaps it would be useful if we focused on some of the opportunities, we being the world. And I think that would be the way I would present it to the G7. And I think what you want out of the G7, you can't take over the agenda. That isn't going to happen. But what you would like, I think, is a clear mention of the substance of this report. And of maybe one particular piece of it, and I liked the partnership and fast track mechanisms, but whatever they are, then you would like to make a point of those being themes in the UNGA meetings when and in Tunisia's participation in the UNGA meetings. Because the only way to begin to get issues on an international agenda is repetition, and there is the point you made. And if then that could be carried through into the investment conference in October, where these points, and maybe you would add in the PPP kind of point, could then again be again be asserted, you could begin to develop a sort of groundswell that these kinds of issues have to be dealt with. But if you just do it a one-at-a-time thing in which somebody goes and gives a speech, nothing's going to happen. So you have to think of it over a year.
Advocacy 101.
Yeah.
Naceur?
You know, we'll be criticizing the government, but we also need to share the fact that the partners needs to turn commitment into actions. You know that we've been promised 40 billion in Deauville's. We didn't get those 40 billions. I believe that too many financial aid is bad financial aid. So we're not begging for money. I mean, we're not this. And Tunisia needs some finance, but it's not that big. I'm not good with numbers. Probably Samia will. So some of this money will pay for the social invoice. So we had a social invoice that has to be paid. This is the cost. This is what I call the cost of the revolution. And it has nothing to do with how good is the government dealing with money. This is an extra cost that we cannot pay back, especially within the crisis in Libya, the economy slowing down in Europe. So we need help in that part. Then when it comes to the money going to the development, I will jump on what Ronald Reagan say, trust, but verify. And one of the mechanisms we brainstormed with Alex when he was in Tunis is to put in place a multi-stakeholder group that will be in charge of seeing if the money is being spent the right way or not. So it will send a good sign for Tunisia partners and also for Tunisia friends. Sir, you said what the US can do for Tunisia. You asked Minister Yassine and immediately review the GSPs. I mean, there's, you know, we had an extra production of olive oil that needs to sell. And we have a very active textile sector, and we have a Tunisian diaspora living here that is willing to come back and invest in Tunisia and create about 20,000 jobs immediately if they have a change on GSP. And probably, I mean, for the next government, we will have to put the FTA on the table again. Especially, we have competitors within the same region that has the FTA.
May I just add, just to correct a point, because I very much agreed with the slant of these remarks. When I was talking about a strategic view, I didn't mean to imply that that is only Tunisia's responsibility. The United States government has stated a particular focus and a particular value of a partnership with Tunisia. It needs to be clear about that too. So if one's going to think about the Group of Seven meeting and the UNGA meeting and then another, the U.S. government has to be consistent in terms of how it approaches those also.
And I think it could be also part of the agenda of the Joint Economic Commission that's going to be held in May 6th, all of these measures that you know were talked about. So I'll give you the last word about support and aid. The president of the World Bank was in Tunis a few weeks ago or a few days ago.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
And has talked about supporting Tunisia. How does it align with this framework that that Carnegie is recommending?
Now, look, the Tunisia case, while we see some asymmetry in while describing what is going on and kind of contradiction or perceived contradiction, everybody believes in Tunisia. I like the word promise. It's a promise, yes. It's a hope, it's a future. Everybody believes on the potential of Tunisia. And this really extraordinary. It's something that it's not easy to get. It's not because we do it for nothing, because of a reason, strategic reason as well. And I've seen firsthand in the bank people fighting, really fighting to increase the Tunisia lending amount, saying that this is the opportunity, and so all what they have said, and at the highest level, and it's not from Tunisian people in the bank. So so this is admirable. I asked even a VP who was fighting with us, why you are doing it? It's not your region. Why you are doing it? He said, look, what Tunisia did is rare in the human history. And the people of Tunisia had the courage. And if we send the signal that if you are vocal and raise your voice, but you are punished, then nobody will do. And this is really a very important cause, very close to my heart. So I saw him fighting for Tunisia like if he were Tunisian or if for his region, so he didn't have any interest. That is very, very important. Then this is for the human right in general. This is the ultimate cause. If someone is vocal and is punished, voila, the other will have the lesson from it. Number two, Tunisia had always been has shown resilience. Then people can believe, because nobody would like to associate himself or herself with failure. So then Tunisians were showing over time that they are slow, but really they create success. They are reliable, they are resilient, and then people would like to bet on them because in the past they produced good results if supported. Now, this time we don't want to make it right and really out of it. In fact, for me, if I think about it, I want to say we need to put Tunisia at work. We need to work. That's it. Stop. Terminus. 5 years. Now we need to work, but for that we need really to use powerful messages, powerful numbers to put people. Two elements of it. We need to recognize that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Is a word that I'm saying. It's not from me, so as you guess, it's from Martin Luther King. And anywhere, in any place, if you have an injustice, it's a threat to justice everywhere. And the défavorisés in Tunisia will go to Tunis capital. Yes, affected. The whole world will be affected by injustice. So we better all together as community of donors, as a community of thinkers in the world, to help addressing injustice, because it will threaten us and our kids and our grandchildren. Number two, and putting that Tunisia should also try to come back to a normal speed in doing things. And it's finding the common ground that I refer to, but this will not happen if someone doesn't give. You cannot receive without giving. It's a human being. And we need really to show, and now the government should also give. For that, the government should change a very simple thing. It's a tweak in the thinking. Rather than talking about budget and 35 billion and you name it, you can analyze and all the way. Talk about revenues. What are our revenues? What we can produce is very simple. What we can do, every citizen, any household, start by saying, what are my revenues? What I can do? I can buy a car, or I can buy a sofa. I can buy food. I don't. So then let us think about revenue. It's a little shift that will make everybody. Number one, we can increase our revenues. It's psychologically a better drive than reduce your expenses, even about us as people, really, it's difficult. Then at the scale and showing our gap, then we need to plan little by little. At the household, we plan. This year I will buy a car, next year I will do a trip. I cannot do both in 1 year. So it's acceptable. So how to create this shift And we were working on our country financing strategy on this dimension of revenue.
Thank you, Samia. So just a few minutes for questions. William?
I've been kind of assisting the project and with research. I was wondering, in terms of your example about Lebanon, you mentioned that things work, and you kind of have this very optimistic view of what happens when the private sector leads a service provision. I was wondering about when it comes to voice, certain communities, when the private sector is providing certain services, are often left out of service provision because the private sector's vision is one of profit generally. And while you mentioned that there should be government oversight and policy, I was wondering how you see, for example, in Lebanon right now, the waste management system, trash is a big issue there, and that is something that is not being dealt with properly by the private sector. How do you see marginalized communities in Tunisia, in the northwest or in the interior regions, dealing with that issue, given that they don't have the voice, the capabilities to express demands in the same way as wealthier regions can? Thank you.
Very good question.
Malouche, World Bank, and Tunisian founding members of the Tunisian American. I have a question to Naceur, since you are the representative of the private sector today. So we heard about the resistance of the labor union for some reform. What about the role of the private sector as a champion of reforms? We don't really hear them loud and clear that they want some structural reforms. And I would even ask whether there is an appetite from the private sector for more competition, for more openness. These structural reforms will bring winners and losers. So will increase the pie for everyone. So how would you, what's your view, since I understand you are a newcomer in the private sector, maybe in Tunisia, on the role of the private sector as a champion of reforms? Starting the negotiation of the deep and comprehensive FTA with the EU, we hear a lot of people criticizing that reform. We don't hear the private sector saying, well, we have opportunities.
All right, we're just going to take literally 1 minute to answer each one of the questions because we're running out of time, unfortunately. So, Naceur, if you want to start.
I mean, when it comes to reform, we're pushing for reforms, but I'll give you a picture so you will understand. You have a private sector living in 2016, dealing with an administration which living in the 1990, working with procedure from the 70s. So we're pushing for reforms, hardly pushing for them. It's not that easy.
Samia? 1 minute as well.
The 1 minute answer. Look, the example of Lebanon, I'm not saying that it's an admirable case from a governance point of view. What I was saying about that is that the private sector can play a major role. That is working, but it has. It doesn't mean that the government should give up his role. What we have in Lebanon is that, and precisely when you give to the private sector the current affairs, etc., you can focus on these policies. You can see the rights. There is no accountability without voice, and this is why I refer to inclusive governance. Governance only doesn't resolve the issues. It should be an inclusive governance, and the way you issue the laws and policies that are inclusive and takes into account the different dimension. But if you are the legislator and do the things, you will judge yourself. Be the legislator and let other people do things, then you will oversee them and tell them, no, it was not our agreement. Address it.
Well, I want to thank all of our speakers for their insights, and the hard part starts now because everybody has a leadership role in this, not only government, private sector, civil society, and I hope that Carnegie is going to continue this effort because this is an effort that really needs to be built upon. There's a dynamic and a potential here that needs to be built upon. So thank you all.
Thanks.
Let's meet in Tunis.
Nice. Okay, we'll meet in Tunis.
I'm
Thank
there
you. Please
every other month.
remain in your seats. Deputy Secretary Blinken will come and speak in just a moment.
I would love to have lunch, dinner, you name it.
Great. I'd very much like to do that. Thanks.
get rid of this. I didn't have any. I didn't bring any with me, but I work direct
So I'll get the detailed comments I was in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So one of my goals is to bridge this gap.
Well, I would love to get together. I'd love to.
That sounds like
I really.
So I discovered your institution, so it's a very important one.
Yeah, I think it is. And by the way,
We'll do this.
Thank you.
Morning again, everyone. Let me first thank Minister Brahim for his eloquent and thoughtful presentation this morning to get us kicked off, and also for our panelists from the private sector for an equally thoughtful set of remarks. And now I'm delighted to welcome our second keynote speaker, my friend and former colleague, the Deputy Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. I have to say that retiring from the State Department after 33 years of diplomatic service was not easy for me, but handing over the reins of the office of the Deputy Secretary to Tony Blinken was pretty effortless. In Washington's often cynical culture, you usually want your successors to make you look good. That was never in the cards with Tony. One of the most gifted diplomats and public servants there is, and one of the most decent people you will ever meet in this often jaded town. There's a great deal to admire about Tony, besides his distinguished resume and 10,000 followers on Twitter. For example, he continues to wear his New York Yankees hat, despite Secretary Kerry's well-known allegiance to the Boston Red Sox. So he's clearly a man of integrity, however questionable his taste in sports teams. But he is also someone who is able to focus not only on the crises of today, but on the opportunities of tomorrow. Tony has led the department's innovation agenda, and he has championed countries like Tunisia, places that can often get lost in the storm and stress of Washington policymaking, but which remain, as all of you know very well, very important, and which require sustained attention by senior American policymakers. Tony was in Tunisia 1 year ago this week and has remained deeply engaged in diplomatic efforts to secure Tunisia's transition. He has also played a critical role over many years in broader U.S. policy in this deeply complicated part of the world. He has a deep sense of what's possible and a deep sense of how to achieve it. We are deeply fortunate that he's taken the time to join us, and I hope you'll join me in giving him a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and thank you all very, very much. Minister Brahim, it's wonderful to see you, be with you today. Ambassador Guya, my friend, Minister Muasher, also very good to see you again, and so many friends and colleagues who are here. It's a great privilege to join you this morning. Let me, though, before I get started, just quickly return the favor. We have a big problem, which is that Bill and I have a mutual admiration society going, and it's convening today once again, briefly. But let me just say this: there is a tendency in global affairs today to prioritize the urgent over the important, to judge by the tweet rather than the fact, to question the value of embassies, even in an age where social media makes everyone a diplomat. And in this world where things are moving so quickly and so fast and so much information coming at you, there are just a few individuals, really just a very few, whose character, whose composure, and whose caliber embody the very mission of diplomacy, and whose record of leadership remind us of diplomacy's tremendous relevance to everything we're doing today. And in my experience, Bill Burns embodies exactly that. He is one of those very, very few people. I have a little Post-it note on my desk that I inherited from Bill that reads WWBD, what would Bill do? I refer to it all too frequently. And I suppose if Bill had to go anywhere after state, we're particularly grateful that he's here at Carnegie, where he's continued to illuminate the path forward on the most critical issues of our day. And what brings us together today is exactly that, one of those issues, thanks to Bill's leadership. So Bill, to you and the entire Carnegie team, thank you for shaping this conversation today, for bringing so many people together around what is a critical issue. Your tireless engagement with the government of Tunisia, with Tunisian civil society, with the international community, has shed light on the challenges ahead, the milestones that we have to reach, and the importance of working together to help Tunisia achieve those goals. 217 years ago, America, fresh from independence, sent its first ever consul across the Atlantic to negotiate peace and secure trade with the Bey of Tunis. 151 years ago, a magnificent portrait of the Bey was given to the United States as a kind gesture in a trying time, and it now hangs with great appreciation in our State Department. And last May, President Obama welcomed President Hidoussi to the Oval Office and hosted the first ever meeting between a U.S. president and a democratically elected Tunisian president. Across this long arc of history, both of our nations have experienced times of great struggle and setback as we have pursued, forever forward, societies that reflect our principles and that actually live our values. Here in the United States, we're reminded every day that our own journey is far from complete. In Tunisia, against the greatest of headwinds, people are proving that no one, no single country, no single culture, no single faith has a monopoly on the ideals of democracy. Across the political spectrum, secularists and Islamists, left and right, have come together in common purpose that shows how democratic transitions, while incredibly difficult, can succeed through courageous leadership and national consensus. In just a few short years, the Tunisian people have negotiated a peaceful transfer of power from a transitional government to a democratically elected coalition government. They drafted a new inclusive constitution that protects freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, upholds human rights, guarantees equality for men and women. They cast ballots in a free and fair election, choosing from more than 100 political parties. We've got just 2 of them. I can only think 100. Challenging. They've created space for civil society to flourish. For the second year in a row, Freedom House has categorized Tunisia as free, the first Arab country to be recognized in this way. Last year, when the Nobel Committee awarded a coalition of Tunisian human rights defenders, lawyers, business owners, labor leaders in the highest prize for peace, it was in recognition of the tremendous commitment of the Tunisian people to chisel the fragile foundations of democratic governance out of the rubble of dictatorship and revolution. So I say all this because it's easy and understandable, and we'll come to it, to get fixated and focused on the challenges, the shortcomings, the deficits. They're real, they're deep, they're difficult, and again, we'll talk about them. But it is so important to level set too and put into perspective what has been achieved, what Tunisians have achieved in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. And it has not been easy. And at times, the forces of opposition to progress, opposition to freedom, they have grown perilously strong. Political leaders were assassinated during the transition, putting at risk the very change for which the Tunisian people had marched in the streets. Violent extremists, too, have tried everything they can to prevent Tunisia's democratic experiment from succeeding. Last year, as Bill mentioned, I was in Tunisia, and I visited the National Bardo Museum to pay tribute to those Tunisians and foreigners who lost their lives in that horrific attack. An attack that struck at Tunisia's very history and soul, but actually even more broadly, in a sense, at civilization. And in the contrast, to those of you who, our Tunisian friends, of course, know this so well, but to those of you who've had a chance to visit, this is one of the most extraordinary museums in the world. I have rarely been as overwhelmed at the sheer magnificence of what was there as in visiting the Bardo. But when you contrast it with the horror of what took place there, and at the time that I went, the bullet holes were still there. In fact, the director of the museum, who was kind enough to give us a tour, actually walked us through the very trajectory that the terrorists had taken that day. And the contrast between the extraordinary beauty of the place and the civilization that it represented and what had happened on that day couldn't have been stronger. But it was still there, still standing, and people were there, still coming. And that's what's so important. But this evil at the heart of the attack on Bardo, in Sousse, unfortunately, tragically thereafter, in Belgrade, just this past March, have raised the specter of violence that has torn apart other countries in the region. But as of now, I think it is fair to say and safe to say that the terrorists and the recidivists have failed. Their savagery has only hardened Tunisia's resolve to meet the ideology of terror with a commitment to the rule of law. So, as I said earlier, the challenges facing Tunisia are as great as any young democracy must face. Challenges of fully eradicating corruption, engaging marginalized populations in its interior regions, reducing the weight of bureaucracy, getting people, especially young people, into productive jobs, and translating reform into tangible results for all people. And unless these challenges are met, it's true that the hope and promise of this extraordinary democratic transition is at risk. It's at risk of withering. It's at risk of losing a unique opportunity that Tunisians have right now to chart a much brighter future. I think what Carnegie has done today, Bill, is to put forward what is an ambitious plan to confront the challenges directly. And at the heart of its proposal is a message that could not be more important. The need for the international community and the Tunisian government and people to tackle these challenges together. Both sides have to deliver if we're going to succeed. As Tunisia's leaders strengthen their commitment to reform, we need to continue to bolster their efforts, helping to fill vital needs, provide critical know-how, and also help cushion the near-term pain of change. Because we know that the decisions that are being made by political leaders are difficult, they're hard, and they sometimes require real risk up front. They sometimes require what seems to be a step back in being able to deliver for people before you can take a leap forward, and that is hard, hard, hard to do. So we're determined to match Tunisia's commitment with our own commitment, deepening the political, economic, and security support it needs to try to make the most of this moment. First, we are committed to help Tunisians consolidate their democratic gains as the greatest bulwark of long-term growth and stability, and an important counterpoint to those who believe that Islam is somehow incompatible with democracy. In rapid order, Tunisia has worked to improve accountability among security services, combat corruption, hold the first ever municipal elections. We've invested in these efforts to reform the security and justice systems, providing safe and effective crowd control training, helping create a prison classification system to properly identify high-risk offenders, inmates with special needs, and also low-risk offenders who can be referred to community correction programs. Just this past February 2nd, the Tunisian parliament approved amendments to the Code of Criminal Procedure that strengthen detainee rights. The new provisions grant suspects the right to a lawyer from the very first moment of detention. They shorten the maximum time someone can spend in detention without being charged. And they invalidate court proceedings if the Code of Criminal Procedure is breached. The reform addresses, in part at least, concerns about allegations of torture and other mistreatment by the police. And of course, what's always critical is the implementation. And we'll be looking to that, and Tunisians will be looking to that. But the legal framework is there, and that's what's so important. At the same time, we've helped Tunisia's parliament and parties institutionalize the democratic practices that the nation's leaders have started, including things like helping members of parliament, parliamentary groups and commissions develop ways to actually solicit input from citizens, document and track citizen requests, prioritize issues to be debated and addressed through legislation. Because after all, they're there as representatives of the people. And their job, just as it is here for our legislators and for folks in government, is to try and address the concerns of the people. And they need to know them, they need to be responsive to them, and they need to act on them. On March 11, the Tunisian parliament passed by 123 to nothing a landmark bill requiring public institutions to publish on their websites reports of oversight bodies, a full budget broken down by regions and municipalities, information concerning public services and contracts. This transparency in government is critical to the credibility of governance, to creating confidence of the citizenry in its elected representatives and the executive branch. These reform efforts have not only been called for by donors and implemented by government officials, they have been demanded by Tunisian society itself. Carrying forward their nation's history of a rich and vibrant civil society, Tunisians are reclaiming space once denied them to actively participate in their nation's economic and political life. In both 2011 and 2014, more than 3,000 trained and certified Tunisian election observers fanned out across the country to send real-time reports and show skeptics what an open, free, and fair and competitive election in an Arab country looks like. More recently, new civil society organizations have formed to prevent the spread of violent extremism, to stop the recruitment, the radicalization, the mobilization of young people as agents of terror. So there's real movement in this area, and we're working to support it. Second, we're helping to deliver on the promises of the revolution by improving the daily lives of Tunisians. The pressure on Tunisia's young democracy to meet the economic expectations of its citizens and move the economy forward is simply extraordinary, especially given all that we know about the link between jobs and security. Over a third of Tunisians are under the age of 25, and Tunisians between the ages of 15 and 30 comprise only 1/3 of the labor force, but 3/4 of the unemployed. The outlook for employment remains challenging, but we're focused on trying to help this cohort emerge as an engine for progress rather than become a recruitment pool for violent extremism. There is, of course, no grievance so bitter, no disadvantage so deep that it ever justifies terrorism. But unemployment, marginalization, hopelessness can sow the seeds of radicalization, just as education, opportunity, and good governance can form the roots of sustainable, inclusive prosperity. We have to address these environmental issues that put communities and people more at risk of going the wrong way. And conversely, in addressing them, actually strengthening these roots and making it less likely that countries move in the wrong direction. With our technical assistance and support, Tunisia's leaders are enacting tough economic reforms and working to create an environment in which business can thrive. And I've had the opportunity to talk to the minister about this in the past. There is a very strong reform agenda. But again, I want to emphasize, we know how difficult it is. And inherently, these are challenging political decisions. And it is very difficult in any political system, including our own, to recognize and act on the need for short-term pain in order to get longer-term gain. But that is the challenge before Tunisia. Late last year, Parliament adopted the Competition and Prices Law to reduce barriers to investment while closing some of the loopholes that allowed companies to use political influence to secure a monopoly or fix prices. And the new public-private partnership law will allow for quicker and greater mobilization of capital into public projects, especially for badly needed infrastructure. We've extended almost $1 billion in loan guarantees to help the government gain affordable financing. And with $60 million in seed funding from the United States, the Tunisian American Enterprise Fund is ramping up its own investments in small businesses, like an IT firm in Sousse, a textile company in Mandouba, a ceramics shop in Naboul. These small and medium-sized enterprises are truly engines for growth and employment, and we have a very strong incentive in helping to create an environment and give them the initial resources they need to try to take off. But we know it's not enough to help established business grow. We also want young people to start them. We want to help Tunisia foster an innovation ecosystem that allows new ventures to flourish and entrepreneurs to fail and try again on the road to success. Parenthetically, it's one of the most interesting cultural challenges that we see around the world. One of the things that people look to the United States for is this entrepreneurial and innovative capacity. And one of the hallmarks of that capacity, as all of you know, is actually a willingness to fail. And indeed, if you're successful and you haven't failed once, people look at you a little suspiciously. But we have a system that allows for people to fail and not be out of the game. Bankruptcy, for example, is absolutely critical. So there's a series of laws that need to be taken into account to create a system in which people can take risks
and not literally worry about losing their shirt or the roof over their head. And at the same time, there's a cultural dynamic to this that's so important in getting people to recognize that it's okay to fail, that may be the road ultimately to succeeding. So we've helped the government make it easier for new businesses to register and access financing. We've expanded our exchange program for students and increased our support for entrepreneurs. The Thomas Jefferson Scholarship Program, the Fulbright Tunisia Tech Scholars. Through those programs, nearly 500 Tunisians have qualified to study at universities and community colleges across the United States. Through USAID, we're training the next generation of Tunisian youth with the skills they need in math, in science, in engineering to compete in a high-tech marketplace. But for growth to stick, for employment to actually come down, Tunisia has to continue pursuing and implementing significant reforms, including revisions to its investment code, banking sector, and tax and customs administration, all of which, if done and completed successfully, will in fact attract more investment and facilitate entrepreneurship and job growth. Third, and in parallel with our political and economic partnerships, we are deepening the security partnership and cooperation in a way that protects our citizens and strengthens Tunisia's capability to defeat those who threaten its freedom and its security. This past September, Tunisia joined more than 60 other nations in the global counter-ISIL or counter-Daesh coalition. We're consulting closely about the danger posed by regional instability, especially in neighboring Libya, where a real and effective government of national unity is urgently needed and is now starting to take root. Our cooperation with Tunisia has never been more important in this area as we work to stop the threat posed by foreign terrorist fighters traveling to and from Iraq and Syria, as well as to Libya. The United States has been working to double our security assistance, which has already enabled Tunisians to acquire badly needed equipment, including night vision goggles, body armor, armored vehicles. More important, it's provided training to help modernize Tunisia's police, its National Guard, its military, into modern forces that are capable of defeating terrorists while also respecting the rule of law. To this end, we've helped improve the way their forces engage with communities, especially those of the interior and the south, and help them develop more effective tools for gathering evidence so the practice of torture is fully excised. Ultimately, Tunisians know that the reflex to meet extremism with extremism only provokes a dangerous spiral of grievance and repression. Stakes today could not be any higher. Across the region, governments are confronting the very same questions as Tunisia, questions of stability and security, of rights and freedoms, without always understanding the answer. The fundamental truth that we recognize and that we grapple with too is that there is no choice between the protection of our citizens and the preservation of our values. It can't be either or, it must be both. Over the long term, we believe from our own experience, but also the experience of other countries around the world, that democracy serves as the strongest defense against extremism and radicalization, precisely because it gives all people the opportunity to express their rights, to pursue their ambitions, to redress their grievances peacefully. In the short term, what's required is tremendous patience, perseverance, and engagement. As Carnegie's report emphasizes, we have to do our part to help the Tunisian people actually see the dividends of democracy. We have to prioritize the coordination of our assistance and ensure that it's delivered to the parts of Tunisian society that need it most. Now, the experts say that on average, successful transitions from dictatorship to democracy with rule of law take somewhere between 15 and 20 years in the best of circumstances. 15 to 20 years in the best of circumstances. For Tunisia, it's been 5 years. So we need to put our expectations in line with the reality of the difficulty and the duration of these transitions. No country can serve as the perfect model for another, and of course there are no guarantees. But Tunisia's early experiences against a backdrop of regional chaos and violence teach us the importance of prioritizing the interests and investing in the human capital of our citizens. No organization has been a stronger voice for this message than Al Bawasala, an organization that I know is well known to pretty much all of you in this room. Set up in the months after Tunisia's first parliamentary elections by talented young Tunisians, it dedicated itself to helping its fellow citizens see inside their political process for the very first time. And as a result, to feel some ownership for that process and some ownership for the direction of their country. In 2013, the French newspaper Le Monde nicknamed this young transparency team Les Incorruptibles, the Incorruptibles. Not long ago, the organization's founder and president, Amira Yayawi, explained it this way, and I quote, "My biggest frustration," she said, "is that each time I had to explain why we should vote for independence of the judiciary, why we should vote for gender equality, each time I never had an example from the region to point to. There was no precedent in the region, and there's no precedence in any country that looks like us. I think what Tunisia did is that tomorrow, a Libyan NGO, or a Yemeni NGO, or a Syrian NGO can point to Tunisia and say, put it in our constitution too." That's what they did. That is incredibly powerful. And it is more needed than it has ever been. Young Tunisians like Amira have propelled their nation into courageous but also uncharted lands where it must now stay the course. And that really is the hard part. And we know there are going to be hard days ahead. We know there are going to be setbacks. We know there are going to be sacrifices. And it's easy for us to say that at the distance of an ocean. It's so much harder for our Tunisian friends to live that every single day and yet to keep standing and keep moving forward. But as Tunisians seek to build the Arab world's newest democracy, they do have the support of friends all over the world, especially here in the United States and significantly right here in this room. The Carnegie report emphasizes how important it is for all of us to try to work together, to combine our capacities and our insights to ensure that we're maximizing the potential of our partnerships. That's very powerful too. So I really wanted this opportunity to come and pay respect to our Tunisian friends and to pay respect to the tremendous work that Carnegie has done in trying to marshal some of the thinking and the energy and commitment that exists here in the United States and around the world for Tunisia. So to our Tunisian friends and to Carnegie, thank you for all that you've done to help Tunisia usher in a future that its people have fought for and the future that they deserve. One of peace, one of prosperity, one of security, one of democracy for every single Tunisian. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.